This video brought to you by Adam and Eve. Get 50% off and free shipping for mysterious ancient artifacts with the code in the description. Hitman 3 is finally out, and after playing it by itself and then again together with the whole World of Assassination trilogy, I'm now convinced it's meant to be played as a trilogy instead. I'm also convinced that when you smush all three games together into one giant super game like this, which these menus, this story, the real-life marketing and release schedule behind it all seem to want you to do, the experience becomes absolutely sublime. It is fantastic. Now that the story makes sense, now that the new music has had room to stretch its wings and grow, and now that some of the jankier weirdness of each individual installment can be put into context for the one next to it, when played as a trilogy all in one go, this has to be one of the best stealth games ever. If not the definitive swan song of the entire stealth game genre, if that's even going to be a thing in the future. This is Metal Gear Solid good. This is Splinter Cell Chaos Theory good, if not better than the both. This is a technological benchmark. This is an artistic accomplishment. IOI's business strategy over the past year has made the best of their bad situation, turning an episodic release schedule into a planned trilogy burdened by always online DRM and funded by the whales buying expensive, confusing DLC packs. It's created a lot of unflattering releases over the past few years. But in all fairness, they've put that funding into where it actually matters, into combining almost a whole decade of work into one absurdly polished and gratifyingly complete campaign. You can now go through it all as just one 20, 25, 30-hour story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. But every single one of those hours flourishes with an intimate, convincing, and irresistibly replayable experience for every player that's going to go through them all. Since they were built for individual releases, these levels can be explored for days or weeks at a time, but before, I'd always hit a point where it started to feel like I was completing these checklists of side quests just for their own sake. What wasn't there before, what provides a critical bit of lubrication for a player to want to put one level behind and move on to the next one, is a story that actually makes sense now, where cutscenes finally feel like a reward for beating a level instead of a confusing reminder that the story exists at all. But go through it all from beginning to end, and it's a story with interesting twists, interesting stakes, and an interesting message that keeps things moving smoothly in a way that gives the impression that the story was not built for individual releases to be stretched over 5 years. Hitman's story is dense and messy. There's a ton, a serious actual metric ton, of important moments that the player character has nothing to do with that all happen off-screen. There's so many cryptic double entendres and visual codes that it's really taking the concept of show, don't tell to such an illogical extreme that sometimes you see subtitles explaining what you're looking at. But that just seems to hammer home how many years ago this was planned in advance. There's so much going on that I've forgotten over the years that the stories of Hitman 2 and 3 by themselves didn't make sense until I did it all over again as one trilogy. To keep things light on spoilers, because if you haven't gone through these games, I immediately recommend you do, the trilogy paces out one 3-act story thusly. 5 years ago, Hitman 1 released with a story that sets up a 3-way conflict between shadowy factions of cryptic conspirators whose complicated conspiracies I was already losing track of by the time Hitman 2 came out in 2019. 2021's Hitman 3 is wholly devoted to the climatic conclusive character growth of the end of that conflict. It's doing the kind of played-out mid-aughts thing where sociopathic video game characters of legacy franchises finally develop a moral conscience. But when I played these games by themselves, the story just seemed to make no sense at all and was largely a negative part of the experience rather than a positive one. But when played all together as a trilogy, that switch gets totally flipped. Hitman 1, 2, and 3 are really just the 3 acts of one actually coherent, actually smoothly paced story. It's still a messy one, not the best, but good enough to keep you wanting to see more and more of how it's all going to play out, and I don't know how much of this is due to the prior knowledge of already having gone through a fuzzy fever dream version of this story over the past half-decade, but going through it all over just 1 week or so, that really shows off just how much foreshadowing and prior thought went into this. Suddenly, I was seeing clues everywhere, like how this surgery robot from the first game was made by the evil corporation of the second game, or how one of the biggest targets of the third game is an unseen minor character recurring through the plots of the second game. There's a ton going on. It's easy to get lost, which makes sense seeing as how this one story got stretched out over 5 years, but now that it can all be wrapped up into one product, it does look like something they had planned from the beginning.
I know you don't care about...
For years upon years, Diana saying this line in Hitman 2016 just came off as dumb as hell and out of touch, until you see it get corrected in the games later on by playing them a day or two afterwards. If you don't play it as a trilogy, you won't notice those callback moments. If you don't play it as a trilogy, you won't notice some of the more clever callback moments. Like how Hitman 3's cutscenes become less and less fancy until they're eventually just text bubbles. That felt like a budget constraint when judging it as a single installment, but when played as a whole trilogy, that now comes off as deliberately designed moments of the story's stakes butting into the game menus. A line like this, delivered during a climatic moment in Hitman 3,
All right. I will leave you to prepare.
hits much, much harder if memories of Diana's speeches from Hitman 1 are still fresh on your mind. At this point, it doesn't even feel right giving each of these games a number anymore. It really truly should be experienced as one big mega super game. And I'm also convinced now that if you're gonna play it all as a trilogy, you should ramp things up to the hardest difficulty. Now, I know I'm a stealth game scamp who's spent more time than I'd like to admit playing games where you sneak around hilariously screwing up everyone else's plans, but trust me, Master difficulty mode is not actually that bad. I'm not being a hardcore gatekeeping gamer about this. These stealth game guards are still gonna act like stealth game guards. You can still walk right past their posts in broad daylight. They won't care, it's cool, unless you're right up in their faces. They're clueless. Their hearing has been buffed only a teeny bit. They're still blind and deaf. They're not difficult to sneak past, but what's more difficult on Master mode is picking a route you'll commit to. The difficulty restricts you down to 1 save per level, and I recommend putting that save at the midpoint. So that way you can screw around and experiment by restarting the beginning and middle of a level to your heart's content, but by the time you reach the end, you will have probably had to commit to 1 or 2 screw-ups that make things interesting. Turns out, you can get away with a gunfight or two, and if you trigger a search phase or accidentally evacuate the party, people will probably forget everything and decide to go back to partying before you expect them to.
Hey you can't be here.
A big thing that makes this not as intimidating as it sounds is that getting spotted by a guard is not a death trap in Hitman. If you wander into a staff zone accidentally, which you will, the staff will just politely but firmly ask you to leave, and then they just let you try it all over again. Beforehand, I would save scum after every little mistake in search of reaching that perfect score. I'd want the most complicated, most elaborate, and most exhaustive perfect stealth route through each individual level to maximize the dollar value of these games' release schedules since they were released as small level packs. But this time, playing it all as one big trilogy of a game, I was instead actually working the mechanics in search of the easiest and safest route that would get me through a level just once so that I could get to the next one and see the next story twist that I was actually able to comprehend this time. Master difficulty mode turns off the mission story guides. You have to use your own intuition and logic to figure out the little vignettes of characters inside, and it's not that hard to figure out. They tend to be fairly logical and fairly well telegraphed. So you end up actually going through that process of scoping out an area's perimeter for which kinds of characters are allowed inside. Without a pop-up in the corner telling you what to do, you actually have to act as and play as the character whose disguise you've stolen. You're not following pop-up instructions, you are using your intuition and agency as a player to act out the different roles in society. Switching your brain off of following instructions mode into the pretend to be someone else mode really hammers home the whole social stealth aspect of this gameplay. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. When being a photographer, masseuse, or chef, do what a photographer, masseuse, or chef would do. There is no greater feeling of satisfaction than organically figuring out a mission story you didn't know about before without these pop-ups giving you hints along the way. In earlier years, I would usually play these games with a custom mix of settings that had me switching from turning story hints on or off while keeping this X-ray instinct vision permanently off. Back in 2016, when the first part of this trilogy released, those aids made the game too easy for me to want to leave them on. But nowadays, your X-ray instincts vision seems to have been nerfed to only be able to peek into the next room, except for your actual assassination targets, who are always visible from a distance. Years ago, that felt kinda cheap. But this time, replaying through the whole trilogy, it felt just right. Being able to spot a target from a faraway distance mean that sniping would now be possible without having already memorized their whole walking routes from the get-go. What balances this out is that sniping people you're omnipotently aware of from a faraway distance is still not the easy way to go. It still takes a lot of work and a lot of risks to find your way to the few perches of viable sightlines the level designers offered. Once your shot is off, enemies will start checking sniping spots soon, and you gotta escape with a whole level worth of guards patrolling through your hiding spots. So if you try to steal an identity that can play out a storyline that'll get a target alone and vulnerable, that makes your infiltration interesting. But if you go for one silenced headshot from halfway across the map, that will make the escape interesting. Without being able to save scum, sniping targets was a backup option I would stumble into for just a couple of these levels, after other options had already fallen through. But after years of not doing that, I can confidently say that playing on easier difficulty modes just didn't encourage that kind of versatility. Ramping things up got me seeing levels I thought I knew inside and out from literally new angles. Jumping all the way to hardest mode for your first run through may sound scary on paper, but I swear this feels like the way the game was meant to be played. For that matter, it weirdly feels like the levels were also meant to be played sequentially from Hitman 1 to 3 all in one go. And oh god, they just get better and better as the games went on, but they definitely seem to focus on different layers as the trilogy goes on. Hitman 2016's levels are vast simulations that ramp up the clockwork dollhouse of previous Hitman games into entire clockwork towns. The tutorial levels are so good that the very first frame of the game has you figuring out camera controls before it even tells you what they are. The whole Paris mission is the developers shouting down from the rafters to please let them make a James Bond game, and it actually happened. Sapienza still stands as my favorite of the first pack of levels, largely thanks to the scale of the simulation. You got like 3 city blocks here that aren't even used for the main mission, which has like 4 different entry points for just the main building alone. My favorite is to take the delivery man and his flowers, throw your briefcase into the castle to skip the pat-down checkpoint. What starts to happen in Hitman 2 is that you get these mission stories that really play into the ironic humor of these games. Oh my god, the writing is so good.
I've been eyeing this place for some time. I trust we can make a quick execution here.
Of course, Mr. Cassidy.
On Interpol's
This is the downstairs living room. It is most commonly used for watching television and other recreational purposes.
Plus, pretty much all of Hitman 2's levels are giant simulated towns. They just increase the stakes of the social simulation itself. It blows my mind how this India level starts with these thugs evacuating an apartment block for a big spooky crime meeting. But if you get rid of the thugs, the residents will actually repopulate the area a few minutes later. On that master difficulty mode, you also start to see some tricks in Hitman 2 that start to feel video gamey, like there's the level designer playing with you even harder, like these upside down cameras hidden around.
Exposition. I'm fixing a fuse box, in case anyone was wondering.
Hitman 3's levels go back to big buildings instead of big small towns, but bookend the experience with the series' greatest scripts. My favorite level out of the whole trilogy is Thornbridge Manor, where the classiness and European charm of the whole franchise is taken to its logical conclusion. A cartoonishly elaborate English manor with tens of generations of hoarded wealth and stolen artifacts inside. The routes to reach its one malicious matriarch run the gamut from your usual workplace accidents and sabotage to absolutely wacky assassination strategies that include convincing the target to kill themselves or even setting things up so that a different assassin does the work for you.
I wonder if there might be some sort of a code. Maybe have a look around the office, 47. That's Madame Carlyle taken care of. Time to get the file on Arthur Edwards.
I did not put that poison there. I just walked inside like 10 seconds ago. The creativity seen here shows a totally different interpretation of the Hitman premise. It's almost like playing a different genre of game, where that mixture of adventure game and stealth game logic are turned into this loving homage to Resident Evil puzzle box mansions. By the way, is everyone still mad about the music in these games? Back in 2016, there was some controversy that longtime series composer Jesper Kyd was no longer working on these games, but the new score and new style by Niels by Nielsen has absolutely grown on me. This thumping fanfare you get when finishing a level is just permanently stamped in my brain at this point.
Waiters will be, waiters.
I'm gonna be hearing that in my head every time I finish washing the dishes for the next 2 months. For a trilogy that almost feels like a 6-year-long resume piece for an application to make a James Bond game, the soundtrack really captures that exotic high-tech spy fantasy to a very adventurous beat. But one thing I noticed after going through it all again is that starting in Hitman 2, Nielsen really plays into a lot of the weird vocal effects that were so unique about the kids' soundtracks. Like when things get spicy in the India level, you suddenly have this chorus of snickering ladies breathing down your neck. But in Hitman 3, the soundtrack gets good. It gets real good. It gets at least as good as any of the older Jesper Kyd soundtracks got in their own right. It's as good as any of the good Blood Money tracks. The combat music in Dubai basically is an epic cinematic Hans Zimmer or Harry Gregson Williams Hollywood action movie orchestra at work. Those barriers are really being brought down nowadays. The big dramatic stuff is as great as all the little subtle leitmotifs and musical Easter eggs that keep popping up as you go through. And of course, from beginning to end, these cheesy Austin Powers stingers never ever get old.
Dispose of a body. He was wearing military boots, cargo pants, dark gray, and a dark turtleneck sweater. Stop doing that! That's
Are you out of your mind? You could have killed somebody.
And after all's said and done, it feels like this whole game, all three of these whole games smushed into one, may never ever get old. This could be a timeless classic people will still want to play 20 years from now. But it's still tied to the internet, and it shouldn't be. I don't see why all this mission XP and progression can't be tied to a local save file, and neither does everyone else. This game represents almost a decade of the employees' lives in an effort to push the envelope of an entire medium forward, and a lot of its magic is going to go away when, not if, the servers eventually go down. I had plenty of opportunities to capture these error screens while recording. The only saving grace is if the developers choose to reverse the one cloud hanging over Hitman's head. The one and only negative thing about the new Hitman games is that they'll still randomly disconnect from a server that never needed to be there at all, and will not be there at some point in the tumultuous future we're in store for. The bewildering irony of it all is that this story recharacterizes Hitman as an adorable vigilante fighting against corruption amongst the 1%. Any new players coming into the franchise at this trilogy, at this time in history, is about to get taken for one of the most satisfyingly cathartic rides video gaming has ever produced. Up until it comes time for the developers to decide what to do whenever keeping those servers on is no longer worth the money. Thanks for watching, thanks to the developers for making these games, and thanks to Adam and Eve for this following sponsorship that I can't believe I'm actually proud of. 6th century BC, ancient Mesopotamia. It's a violent time among the earliest human civilizations, and one that brought a new belief in the earliest of humankind. AdamandEve.com with the code BunnyHop was first written down during the Babylonian exile, when captive Israelites created their own mythology influenced by the Mesopotamians, who left behind these mysterious advanced artifacts. Could these tubular objects, these models rather, be evidence of ancient submarines or ancient aircraft? These mysterious artifacts are remarkably similar to the adult toy designs still used today on AdamandEve.com with the code BunnyHop. They would package these things in discreet shipping materials so that their roommates would never find out for thousands of years. And the purposes behind these objects, what people did with them, have absolutely, positively baffled everyone. I mean, no one had any possible way of guessing what these pure enigmas were for, until now. For over 50 years, AdamandEve.com have donated 20% of their profits to fight the spread of HIV and AIDS around the world. They would offer their customers 90-day no-hassle returns, and they were somehow able to do this long before people knew about basic sanitation. Were ancient civilizations responsible for creating your #1 source of online adult toys? Find out on AdamandEve.com with the code BunnyHop.